Hello, I want to welcome you to Cruising Puerto Rico and the Spanish Virgin Islands. This is Captain Dr. Dave, and as you can see from this map of Puerto Rico that I have on the screen and my opening slide, it's basically a great big rectangle. Okay, now on paper it's a great big rectangle. In real life, it's really not all that big. Okay, from a cruising standpoint, it's only a little over 100 miles in length and about 40 miles north to south. So it's a pretty compact little island, very easy to get around. It is known as the Isla del Encanto, which is the island of enchantment. Uh, Borinquen is the Taino name for the island. The Taino Indians were the original settlers there, and the natives refer to themselves as Borinqueños or Boricuas. There's lots of cultural heritage on this island, if that's what you like. The Taino Indian culture, then you have the Spanish culture, which really predominates on the island. And then on top of that, you have the superimposed North American or United States imprint on the island. So you have a nice mixture of cultural impact on this island. There's petroglyphs in a lot of places left over from the Taino Indians. There are rum distilleries on the island, a number of them. Bacardi, of course, in San Juan. And then in Ponce, the second largest city on the island is Ponce. San Juan is the largest. In Ponce, we have Don Q, which is Sarayes, and it is the most popular rum in Puerto Rico. They're primarily known in the United States for their Don Q 150, which is a 150 proof rum that they make that tends to, if you want to get blasted, that's the rum you choose. There are also other rum distilleries in Arecibo, Bayamon, and Mayagüez. There are also local rum makers that make a type of moonshine rum known as Pitoro or Cañita, and you can pick this up around the island. There's lots there of geographical interest on this island. It's really a compact package offering an awful lot of diversity in the way of natural resources. It has mountains, and there's some significant mountains there. Rainforest up in the mountains at the eastern end of the island near San Juan. There's seashore around the entire perimeter of the island and some very nice, very beautiful beaches that go with it. There's diving, lots of interesting diving. Remember, you have the Puerto Rican Trench that runs just along the north coast of Puerto Rico. Then we have El Morro and Old San Juan, which culturally offers, and it's from an entertainment standpoint, offers a very interesting place to visit. And it's all available in a compact package, as I said before, 112 miles east to west and about 40 miles north to south. So why would you want to cruise Puerto Rico? Well, in addition to everything that we just talked about, all of these pleasantries that the island offers, it has a unique situation of being able to offer Caribbean cruising. You can be at anchor in the Caribbean one moment, and a few hours later you can be in the heart of the United States, basically. U.S. prices and availability of products. You have all of the major chains are present in Puerto Rico. There are Walmarts all over the place and Kmart's. There's Sam's Clubs. There's about, I think, 11 Sam's Clubs on the island. There's 4 or 5 Costco's on the island. There are 2 or 3 West Marines on the island, Pep Boys. You have supermarket chains, a number of significant supermarket chains, Grande, Pueblo, Amigo, not to mention Walmart. So you have all of the conveniences of home, so to speak, and yet you can be at anchor in your boat in the evening, sitting and having a sundowner in the cockpit and looking out on the Caribbean turquoise blue water, and then in the morning you can be off to the city to take care of your supply needs and any shopping that you need to do, and again be back at your anchorage in the evening. Where else in the United States can you do that? You can't do it in the Virgin Islands. They do not offer this kind of diverse commercial establishments that Puerto Rico offers, not to mention the size of the island. And you have the availability of low-cost flights back and forth to the continent, which is something else you don't get elsewhere in the Caribbean, with the exception of maybe the Dominican Republic, which is not United States by any stretch. We have the advantage here of the United States Coast Guard maintaining aids to navigation throughout the Puerto Rican waters and all the way through the U.S. Virgin Islands, which translates into easy, relaxed cruising. You have good quality maintenance to the aids to navigation and very reliable system that we're all familiar with. And to top it all off, in this luxurious cruising ground that I'm talking about, there most of the prime cruising grounds offer free moorings, courtesy of the Dominican or the Puerto Rican Department of Natural Resources. So there's lots of things to offer up here to make Puerto Rico an attractive place to cruise. So in the South Coast is what we are principally going to talk about because of the great cruising conditions and opportunities that the South Coast offers. The North Coast, on the other hand, has limited protection, is exposed continuously to the North Atlantic seas and to the winds and so forth of the North Atlantic, whereas the South Coast, you're in the Caribbean, where you have the calm, easy, laid-back situation, nice calm seas, and good protection of lots of little nooks and crannies to tuck into for protection. Once you've done the north coast of Hispaniola, and if you come down that way, which is the recommended route that Bruce Van Zandt recommends in his Gentleman's Guide to Passages South, and it happens to be the way that most Americans tend to come south from the mainland. Once you've done the north coast of Hispaniola, you probably aren't going to have any questions as to why the north coast of Puerto Rico is not very attractive. So, and there's not very much information available on the north coast of Puerto Rico, but frankly, there's not much information available on the north coast because there isn't much that it has to offer in the way of cruising opportunities. So the south shoreline is what we tend to focus upon, and it offers lots of places for anchoring. It keeps when you're on the south coast of the island, it keeps the entire breadth of the island between you and the North Seas, okay, the seas of the Atlantic. So you have plenty of protection. Just follow Bruce Van Zandt's book. Pick up a copy of Gentleman's Guide to Passages South. It is in its latest incarnation. I think it's in its 10th edition, which is he claims to be his final edition. He is getting old. But the instructions that he offers for how to get there and how to cruise are still very, very relevant and very, very useful. There are lots and lots of harbors that are available within a day sailing distance anywhere you happen to be on the island. You do want to avoid Arrecife Margarita, which is between Cabo Rojo and La Pagueras, along that stretch of the south coast, which is the kind of the southwestern end of the south coast, which is a significant reef area, but it's very well marked on the charts and very easy to avoid. If you're going to cruise the south coast, your best bet for hopping from one anchorage to the next is to bring up your anchor in the early morning hours. Listen to your weather. If you have what sounds like a decent weather window, up anchor somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning or so is a good time to go if you're only going to go 20-30 miles. Up anchor at 4 o'clock in the morning, pull out, stage yourself out the night before, and then up anchor at about 4 o'clock in the morning and get your cruising done. And by the time you drop your anchor by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, you've beat the trade to the rise of the trade winds, and usually will have a very, very pleasant cruise if you do that. Some things to consider. Some cruisers do like to summer in in Puerto Rico. I'm sorry, I'm kind of hung up on the DR here for a moment. The Puerto Rico tends to be a very attractive summer location for a lot of cruisers because it does offer some hurricane protection, but it is a crapshoot because it is facing the Caribbean rather than the areas that you're going to be cruising are not on the north coast. If you're on the north coast, you have a little protection if a hurricane comes up across from Africa and turns its way up northward, as they tend to do. The north coast would give you some protection if it had any to offer, but the south coast, you are wide open to a direct hit should it happen. Now there are a couple of areas that are decent for holing up, that are not too bad in a pinch, But I can't, in good faith, recommend to anybody that you spend hurricane season here. There are some who think that the area around La Peguera is not bad. There are a couple of very good hurricane holes. One in Boquerón at the west end of Puerto Rico. Another area of hurricane holes in the area of Hobos, which is just east of Salinas on the south coast. The diving and the cruising is very, very relaxing in the summer here, and it is a wonderful place to spend that time as long as you have a heads up as to what the weather is and are ready to run and seek protection in the event a storm crops up. Bruce talks about the Puerto Rican Navy in his book, which are the large pleasure boats that tend to come out in the summertime. Usually in the winter there aren't too many of them, because in the wintertime it's winter and the Puerto Ricans view that as not being vacation time. But there's a fleet of privately owned large cabin cruisers that tend to tie up a lot of the anchorages and kind of wreak havoc with some of the moorings that are available. But it's just part of vacationing and part of cruising in Puerto Rico, and a very enjoyable part of it. Keep in mind it's a south-facing coastline, and that makes it vulnerable to hurricane damage. Wintering in Puerto Rico, you have, like I said, you have the beaches and the moorings and on dive locations pretty much to yourself, because the Puerto Ricans consider winter a time to stay home. If you go to the mall for Christmas, you'll see all the parkas and the boots and the sweaters and all that stuff in the windows at the shopping centers, even though it's 80 degrees outside. I think it probably has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of Puerto Ricans do go back and forth between the United States and probably need those clothes for their winter travels. Puerto Rico is a natural stopover on your way south, so even if you don't have any plans for Puerto Rico as a destination, it's definitely worth some exploring on your way down to the Lesser Antilles, and give it some consideration, because it is a worthwhile place to visit. Language is Spanish, so you do get a opportunity to practice your Spanish if you want to do that. And one of the nice things about Puerto Rico is that there's always somebody nearby who can speak English in case you are running into trouble. This is not a third world country in the way that the Dominican Republic is. You don't have to worry about power going out. You don't have to worry about a lot of the issues that you run into in the Dominican Republic. It is the United States, and you don't have to worry about anything that is not American, but you're still, keep in mind, you are in the Caribbean. So if you're coming to Puerto Rico, if you're coming from the Dominican Republic, watch your weather crossing the Mona Passage. Refer to Bruce Van Zant's Gentleman's Guide for information on crossing the Mona Passage. It can be a tough one to make. You have to really watch your weather and pick the right window for crossing the Mona Passage, but for the most part, it's not. It's a 100-mile crossing where if you give yourself a decent weather window, you should make it without any problem. Your best bet is to come down from the Dominican Republic, as mentioned in his guide. Do not try to go directly from the Bahamas. It's not as easy as it might look on a chart. When you get down to the southeast Bahamas or the Turks and Caicos, it looks very tempting to make a hop directly to Puerto Rico, but it's still 300 miles or so to get down through the Mona Passage and around. And while we were spending our couple of years that we were in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican waters, we would routinely, at least a couple times a year here, usually on Chris Parker's WeatherNet, we would hear a radio call from somebody who was halfway between the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, struggling along, who had lost a rudder. Okay, it's really tough. That's some nasty seas that run along between the Bahama Banks and the Greater Antilles. You got to keep in mind you're crossing over some of the deepest water in the world, and it roars like a river through there. and it's hard to get a weather window that's going to give you enough time to make a 200 or 300 mile trip without getting some damage. So, you know, you can check out my Island Hopping to the Caribbean book, okay, or check out my Island Hopping to the Caribbean uh, webinar that I offer on my Island Hopping to the Caribbean website. So there's lots of opportunities to get some information on this. There are also a few books that are available at a website called freecruisingguides.com, where you can get some additional cruising information about Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic for free. Points of entry when you're coming from the west, if you're coming from the Dominican Republic or the Bahamas, the legal customs spot where you're supposed to check in is in Mayagüez, which is on the western shore of the island of Puerto Rico. Now, this is a pretty large commercial harbor. The protection isn't all that great. We had some friends who went there to check in and ran aground in the harbor. Not a cruiser-friendly harbor. Although it is technically not legal, there's a lot of cruisers who tend to check in Boca Raton, which, you know, tie up, drop the hook in Boca Raton and catch a taxi to Mayagüez for check-in purposes, which is what we did when we arrived in Puerto Rico. We came into Boca Raton, which is a big, wide open bay that has easy anchoring, easy access to shore, very pleasant. No commercial shipping to speak of whatsoever, and a lot of local Puerto Rican recreational vessels that tend to anchor there. Just a very pleasant harbor. Easy in, easy out. Go to shore and catch a taxi to Mayagüez, which is about a 30-mile drive, I think, or 20 miles maybe, and do your check-in in Mayagüez. You didn't hear this from me. I don't recommend it because it is not officially recognized, but this is what a lot of cruisers do. If you're thinking at all about a stopover at Mona Island, give it a second thought. There's you need to have good charts, pay attention to your navigational aids, and be careful. We had some good friends who had already circumnavigated once aboard their boat, and they decided to pull in at Mona Island for an overnight, and they hit so hard on the bottom when they were going through the cut going into the little bay that they were afraid they were going to sink. They were really concerned that they might have done some serious damage to their boat. As it turned out, they did not, but keep in mind that that's a little bit of a spooky spot to go in and out of. Now, here's a picture of the approach to Puerto Rico, and you can see that you have the Turks and Caicos up here coming across. The way that we normally come down is to come across from Providenciales in the Caicos Islands, across the Caicos Banks, over to Salt, or to Sand Key down here at the very corner of the Caicos Banks. Then head south to Luperón, which is right here on the north coast of the Dominican Republic, and next to it, by about 20 miles to the east, is Ocean World. Either one's a good choice for a stopover, either a lengthy one in Luperón or a very relatively short stop at Ocean World, and then head across the north coast all the way over to Bahia Samaná, which is this blue area right here on the eastern end around Cabo Samaná, and then down across Cabo Engano, down across the Mona Passage, and down to Boca Raton, which is down here in the very southwest corner of Puerto Rico. That's pretty much how it's done in a nutshell. And this is a picture of what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. You can see the United States, continental United States up here, the peninsula of Florida here, the Bahamas coming down through here, and then when you get down to the bottom of the Bahamas, you are down here where you have Great Anagua over here, and Mayaguana right up in here. The Caicos Banks are right up in here. You have to cross to get to the Dominican Republic. You're crossing some very deep water, and when you come along here to the Mona to cross the Mona Passage, you can see you have the Mona Rift here. I mean, this is some of the deepest water in the world. This is the Puerto Rico Trench. The Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico tend to sit along that trench, and you know, this is a separation point between the Caribbean plate and the North American plate. So there's some, you know, some treacherous situation here that you need to be aware of what's underneath you. But anyway, so my concern here is that you come into Boquerón, which is this large blue bay down here at the very bottom, as opposed to Mayaguez, which is this wide open area up here near the top of the chart. You got good protection in Boquerón from the prevailing trade winds out of the east, and you're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from coming around Cabo Rojo, which is right here, and you're into the Caribbean. Okay, this is the mark between the Mona Passage at the south corner of Puerto Rico here. This is the beginning of the Caribbean Sea. So if you come into Boquerón, keep in mind, again, it's not an official port of entry. It's not approved. It's technically not legal for you to come in there, even though a lot do, and I've not heard of anybody having any problems from it. Mayaguez is a major commercial port, and it is the official entry point for the east coast of Puerto Rico. Boquerón, on the other hand, is very easy in and out, and it's a good anchorage, good holding. It's a nice little town, lots of little restaurants and stuff there. It's a resort town, especially for the younger kids. Excellent protection from prevailing winds, and keep in mind there's a major hurricane hole here inside the Boquerón harbor. There's a little entrance into the hurricane hole, which offers probably about as good a protection as you're going to find in Puerto Rico, but unfortunately it's very small, and it's not likely, probably in the event of a storm, it's not likely that you would get in as a cruiser. It is easy to catch a cab to Mayaguez from Boquerón. You can get your U.S. Customs sticker in Mayaguez. Check in for local boaters option for regional use, so that you can check in and out by phone if you're going to spend much time in Puerto Rico. Very convenient. And as I said, there's a hurricane hole. From here, you go around Punta Aguila and Cabo Rojo and onto the south coast, and you are officially in the Caribbean at that point. This is a picture of Boquerón. You have one of the little restaurants on the left there, and the pier that sticks out into the bay there on the right. That's right off that restaurant. Now, when you go around Cabo Rojo and turn the corner there and go along the south coast of Puerto Rico, the first decent place you're going to find that's just past Arrecife, Margarite, is La Peguera, which is on the coast. Now you look at your charts and it looks a little complicated. It looks kind of reefy and it's kind of spooky because there's a little channel going in. It really is pretty straightforward. It's well marked, you know, the Coast Guard's marked, but put the markers in here, and it's very easy to get in and out. You've got plenty. We were traveling with 6.5 feet, so you know, we had a significant draft, and we never had any problems anywhere in Puerto Rican waters to speak of. So, you know, read your chart, look at your charts, and you can get in here very easily. There's a University of Puerto Rico research vessel there. It's probably 150, 200 foot ship that stays tied up in the waters there at La Peguera. They can get in and out. You know, you can. There are what they call houseboats that are along the shoreline in La Peguera. They're actually houses that are built on stilts in the water. Very colorful, very pretty area to visit. Lots of reefs around this area, lots of conch, pretty blue water. And La Peguera is a popular Puerto Rican resort town. Very nice place to visit. There's places, there's lots of commercial places, there's restaurants, and some cruisers do summer here. I heard from one of the local Puerto Rican gentlemen that I talked to that because of the wide continental shelf off La Peguera, that there's not very much surge in the event of a tropical storm or a hurricane coming up onto the south coast along that particular stretch. You know, that was his claim. To me, it did not look well protected enough to want to be there in the event of a hurricane strike. Maybe if it were a glancing blow by a hurricane, it might offer some protection, but it's certainly not the sort of place where you'd want to set yourself up for a direct hit. There's a lot of barrier islands and reefs around the area. There's a number of, wherever I've put these little scuba flags is just to remind you that these are areas where there's supposed to be some pretty decent scuba diving. Now, I never did any scuba diving when I was in Puerto Rico other than to work on even the whole time I was cruising. I never did any scuba diving recreationally. I did all my scuba diving was just for purposes of working on the bottom of my boat. But Annie and I are big time snorkelers, and we did a lot of snorkeling all over in this country and had a great time. Very, very good spots. But there, if you're into big time scuba, there are some excellent walls. There are some excellent places to visit in this particular area. Nearby, close to La Paguera, there's a bioluminescent bay where you can go. It also serves as a hurricane hole near Mate Island, just to the, I believe it's just to the east of La Paguera. And there's a wall offshore where it's supposed to have some pretty good scuba diving out there. And here's a chart showing the entrance to La Paguera, and you can see that you got the Paso del Medio here. That is, you come right up in here, you carry 6 fathoms of water, 30 feet of water, 35 feet of water up here, go between a couple of little keys and then follow your way in and work your way in, and it really is much easier than it looks, and there's plenty of water under most circumstances. So it's a very pleasant place to visit, and offers some little micro cruising opportunities in and of itself. Isla Mate, where we're talking about the bioluminescent bay, is right here, and then you've got this area up in here where you've still got 6 feet of water up in Bahia Montalva. There's a lot of area around here for some interesting cruising, and you could probably spend a summer just cruising these areas especially if you have a shoal draft vessel. And this is a picture of the houseboats, as they call them, on the water in La Paguera. You can see they're very colorful, very pretty, interesting area to visit, and these places are quite enjoyable to look at. The main street in La Paguera on the left, the upper left there, the houseboats on the upper right, and along these little mangrove islands that you see all over in the water off La Paguera, there tend to be small boats that are tied up. Some of them are bigger boats, but tied up all over the place in those little mangrove islands. And here's a little resort that's on the mainland along by La Paguera. So the next stretch we're talking about here is to go from La Paguera to Guanica. Now La Paguera is over here off the chart to the left. And basically what you are doing here is coming along out here in the deep water. You'll be a mile or two offshore. Follow, at least we were, try to stay where we don't have to be too conscious of the depths that we are in, and then come in through between these bluffs into the mouth of the bay at Guanica. And Guanica is kind of a forked bay. It tends to be a commercial portion of the bay is on the right as you go in, and the cruiser portion of the bay, the recreational vessels tend to flock over to the left side of the bay or the west side of the bay as you go in. There's also an area along here after you pass Guanica called Guayanilla. It's a very big harbor, but it tends to be very, very commercial. There's smokestacks and oil storage tanks and all that sort of thing all along the shore over here. Bruce Van Zandt recommends that you avoid it, which we did. We found his advice usually to be pretty reliable, and if he said stay away from something, we tended to stay away from it. Here's a chart of Guanica Harbor. And we came in here and dropped the hook over here in the western end of this bay, somewhere along on the edge of the blue and the white, and had a pretty good stay here. Now, one of the issues we have here, as you can see by the contours on these 2 points that come out to form the mouth of the harbor, it's a pretty elevated, and those are some pretty high rocky bluffs there, and they tend to, as a result, they tend to block a good portion of the air movement, and you don't get much breeze in there. So we found Guanica to not be a very pleasant stay. It's just a little too stifling, a little too, it just lacks that trade wind breeze that you come down to the islands for. So we were in we didn't have any interest in spending any more time there than we had to. Again, over here on the eastern shoreline over here, this is all commercial area along here. When you come in, you want to bear to the west and go over in here. There are some restaurants. There are some beaches over here. This is the recreational part of the port area. So Guanica is an easy in and easy out. There's no doubt about that. You shouldn't have any problems with that. It does have high bluffs on each side of the entrance, so it may be a little hard to see until you're right out in front of it, but you get good protection, so you don't have to worry about, it's not a place I'd probably want to hole up in a storm because there's no small protection in there. All you have is the big bluffs. But it's good protection under most trade wind conditions. If you get a day that's a little too stormy or a little too windy, it's probably a good place to hang out. The west side is recreational. Again, the east side is more commercial. And we thought it was just a little too tight in here for us to have a good time. I mentioned here we had a bad experience when we were dropping the hook. We backed down on the painter on our dinghy, and it got wound around the prop. Okay, that made us a little less excited about staying here. I don't know why, but it did. And to the point where our Avon dinghy was actually standing vertical in the water with its nose partway underwater when we got all done. And fortunately, we were able to get it loose and get it freed up and get the dinghy painter out from around the prop, and nothing was permanently damaged in any way, but it was one of those situations where it was frustrating and annoying and all of that sort of thing. And that happened to be the very day after we were cruising from rounding the point or coming from La Peguera, where we looked behind the boat and saw a dinghy off in the distance and thought, wow, somebody lost their dinghy, and then looked down and realized that it was us who lost our dinghy. So, those dinghy things happen. That's the only time we ever had anything bad happen with our dinghy, and it happened 2 days back to back to each other. This is a picture of Annie on the bow of the boat as we are coming into Guanica, and you can get an impression of the high bluffs on each side of the entrance there, and the kind of protection that you have in this particular harbor. Again, here we are looking at the next step is Guanica to Ponce. You can see that Guanica is right here. You come out on the way to Ponce. We had a stop right here by Punta Ballena, which is a place called Gilligan's Island. It's a little Cayo Aurora, which is a little state park area where we tied up for the night. I think we spent a night, maybe 2 there, hanging out behind that little island before we made the hop across Guayanilla over to Ponce, which is right here. This is the Bay of Ponce, and this is the harbor that we're heading for our next stop. Ponce is the second largest city in Puerto Rico. Their harbor offers pretty decent protection and is an excellent place to hang out. If you're coming from the Dominican Republic, that's your generally what I consider to be the first opportunity to enjoy life back in the United States. It's the first sizable city that offers everything that you may want. So what we're doing is stopping at Gilligan's Island, Cayo Aurora. You look on your chart for Cayos de Cañagora, which are just to the east of Guanica as you're coming out of the mouth of the harbor of the bay at Guanica, and it's probably no more than about 5 miles over to Gilligan's Island. It's part of the park system. It was closed when we were there because it was Sunday, or so, I don't know what the deal was, but it was closed. And you can anchor really quite close to the island, go ashore if you want, and okay, it's about 3 miles offshore from Guanica. And again, here you're looking at on this chart get my pointer here. Okay, you're coming out of the mouth of Guanica, and you're going to come across through this area back in here, and you're going to anchor somewhere right up in here is where Gilligan's Island is, Cayo Aurora. And very easy to get in and out, and then when it's time to leave, basically come back around here and come around. And this is, I've got a marker pointing right here, this is Gilligan's Island. So we anchored back here in the water that was in double digits in feet, and just off the single digit. Usually we tried to anchor at about 10 feet, 12 feet, and spent the night there, dinghied ashore to check things out, and then came out the next day and came around and left. And this is the sign on the beach when you go ashore at Cayo Aurora. And it says basically no, telling you what's not allowed, things like fires, no ball games, and no drinks in bottles, no campfires, no pets, no fishing with, no spear fishing, no cutting the mangroves. There's a number of things that it states on that sign in Spanish. And now we're looking at Guayanilla from offshore. We're probably three miles off from on this picture, and very industrial looking. We passed a number of barges and a number of ships in this particular area. We had no interest in going in. It just looked looked like too much of a hubbub for us to want to go in. And since Bruce Van Zant's book said it didn't offer anything of interest for us, we decided to avoid it. So here we are once again coming into crossing over to Playa de Ponce, which is over on the right-hand side of this chart. In Ponce, since it is the second largest city in Puerto Rico, you can do everything and anything that you want to do here. You can get anything done. You can find any products that you might need. You can it offers everything San Juan does, only without that metropolitan feel. Ponce still feels like a small town. So, shops and restaurants. One of the issues we had with Ponce is that nothing is an easy walk from the harbor. Annie and I live by the adage, everything is within walking distance if you have the time. And, here to the nearest commercial thing, which was one of the shopping centers where the Walmart and all of that was, it was about a 2-mile walk from the harbor. And we walked it several times while we were there. So we spent at least a couple of weeks in Ponce while we were making this trip. And when we needed a rental car, we would get a rental car and go visit Sam's Club, which is probably 5 miles away from the harbor. But the Sears, I think there's a Sears and a Kmart, and there's a Pueblo grocery store that are a couple of miles away right by the mall. But everything here, you can go to the movies. You can go to the movies, and you get a choice generally of seeing the movies in Spanish or seeing it in English, or sometimes it was in Spanish with English subtitles, or vice versa. Boat parts and repairs. We had a haul out done here and had our bottom painted with a local brand of bottom paint by the yard. They did an excellent job. The paint was an excellent paint. Very nice marina. It's the fishing and yacht club that's there in the harbor at Ponce. And but the one issue I had with this harbor is if you get in where the water is a decent depth, the boats are so close together and they're so thick in there that I wouldn't want to be in there. So when you come out to where the water is a little more open, the boats aren't so close, then you're sitting in 35 feet of water, and so when you're on 50 feet of road and 35 feet of water and you think you're solidly anchored, it always makes me a little uncomfortable if the situation gets tough. So I even though we didn't have any problems here, my feeling was that Ponce, anchored out in front of the fishing club, is probably a touchy spot to be anchored. And you can see the chart here coming in to Ponce. The commercial harbor is up here near the top, where the commercial anchorage is located. But the area that you come into right here is the harbor for the recreational boats. The yacht club is right along here. The yard where we had our boat painted is right along in here, and you can see the depth. It's it's 30 feet, 20 and 30 feet, way up into this harbor, and we were anchored out somewhere right out in here at around the 30-foot mark, I believe. We still had excellent coverage, but when you get into this area from about here back, it is wall-to-wall boats back in there, and it's tough. We did some snorkeling over here on this Isla de Cardona and over at Las Ojitas, and this was a nice area for hanging out. There is right up in this area, right in here someplace, there is a wholesale grocery store where you can go and get a lot of stuff if you want to do supplying, and it is within walking distance of the harbor, and quite convenient. All right, here's some pictures from downtown Ponce. Here's the church and one of the main streets here. This is I believe a hotel that's in downtown Ponce, and here's a view from inside the church. Some very beautiful architecture in this town, and it's a very pretty, very quaint town. And it doesn't feel like a huge city in the way that San Juan does. So the next stop when we came out of Ponce was to stage our way out for a fairly long jump, because the next place where we planned on stopping for any period of time was our goal, our objective on the south coast of Puerto Rico, which is Salinas Harbor. To get there, we wanted to stop on our way, so we staged out to Caja de Muertos, which is Coffin Island in Spanish, and it is only about a 5-mile sail from Ponce Harbor out to Caja de Muertos. So it's an easy, quick, up your anchor, head out to the island, and drop the hook in what we considered to be the very first opportunity for us to feel that we were really in the Caribbean at this point. The water was turquoise, the reefs were beautiful, the schools of fish that we've run into while we were snorkeling were spectacular. Blue tangs by the hundreds. You could, the conch all over the place, and it is a national park, so that you're not allowed to take anything. You're not allowed to grab any conch. You're not allowed to do any fishing here, but it still was wonderful snorkeling, a great place to visit. We had fun hiking on the island. It's not a very big island, but it gives you quite good protection from the prevailing winds. And it's a good staging out point for the jump to Salinas. So under prevailing conditions, you get pretty good protection here. And you can see that Caja de Muertos is right here. Where we anchored is over here. We're on this leg that's a little more north-south. We were right along in there in a little, I won't call it a bay, it's an open roadstead, but you're able to come from out at the harbor here in Ponce, this little nook right here, come around and come across and drop the hook right here. It's about 5 miles. And then you're ready to stage out and go around this way and come across to get to Salinas, which is over in here, Salinas Harbor, right here. So you're coming, it's a pretty good jump, probably about a 30-mile jump, I believe, to get maybe 25, I'm not sure, to go from Caja de Muertos to Playa Salinas, but very easy trip. And what we did is we stayed at least a couple of nights at Caja de Muertos, because we were the only boat that was anchored there, and it was just so beautiful sitting there that we spent at least an extra night there. And then we took off on this particular leg, I think we took because it was going to be a longer than normal jump, we took off about 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning to go to Salinas. And this is the water. You can see that we're anchored out here, and we were right in here in about 12 feet of water, somewhere in here. And there's a dinghy dock right here. They actually use it for the ferries that come from the mainland, because this is a national park. It does have service from the mainland. And then Annie and I took the path and hiked the path up to the lighthouse on the top of the island, which is 240 feet above sea level and seems like a mile above sea level because everything around is so flat. Beautiful, spectacular view from up there. And there's a beautiful old Spanish architecture lighthouse up there from probably the 1880s or 1890s. And it's been all covered with graffiti and everything in the United States. If this were in the United States proper, it would have been adopted by a lighthouse rescue group and been rehabbed, but it's still not been done there yet. But beautiful architectural structure there. This is a picture of Fidelis anchored off Caja de Muertos, and you can see the mainland in the background. We're looking to the north, and it's a beautiful anchorage. This is not coral that you see. It's just areas where the bottom is not pure sand, but most of the water, but the bottom in this particular location is very sandy. There's a picture of the architecture of the lighthouse on the top of the island, and from that view it doesn't look too bad. It is in need of some rehab though. Down below you can see that the rocky, this is at the western end of the island. You can see a statue up in here. There are several little areas up in here where there are shrines that are tucked back in the rocks that the locals have put there. Caja de Muertos is Coffin Island, and it's just like Virgin Gorda in the BVI. It's one of those long islands that tends to look like a person lying on their back because it's high at one end and high at the other end and low in the middle. Over here on the right side you can see the cacti that are growing along the trails. If you decide to hike up to the lighthouse, we wore Crocs when we did this, and we were lucky we survived without running something into our foot. Like everything on these Caribbean desert islands, anywhere down there, the vegetation tends to be very, very cactus related, with lots of spines and lots of things to stick in. And when I got done with the hike that day and got on board the boat, I had a couple of pieces of vegetation stuck in the bottom of my Crocs with I was lucky they didn't go into my foot. They had thorns on them that were at least half an inch long. So you want to wear proper attire when you make this little trip. There's a picture from up on the top at the lighthouse looking out. You can see Fidelis sitting at the tip of Annie's finger. The area that I pointed out, that where those shrines are is right down here, and you can see the little dock down here where we came ashore. So we took the dinghy from our boat over to here and then walked the paths coming up here. And it was a fun day. It was well worth our while to make that trip to the top of the island. Now, when we left Caja de Muertos, we were anchored right here, and again we came around kind of the north side of the island and stayed. You got to watch your depth through here, but most of it looks pretty clear. There are some shoal areas, and we came all the way across till you get to Cayos de Ratones. We came outside, I believe, on the Cayos. I'm not sure if we came south or north of Cayos Cabezazos, but you want to come around and come inside Cayos de Ratones, because the turn into Salinas is that little nook right there, and you want to watch when you get there. So we're off to Salinas from Caja de Muertos, and Salinas is kind of the Luperon, what I consider to be the Luperon of Puerto Rico. It is a very, very well protected harbor, a very large harbor with excellent protection, with a zillion boats hanging out in there and a lot of cruiser boats. It has fantastic protection as long as it doesn't get a direct hurricane hit. Back in 1998, when George came through, the bay at Salinas got a direct hit and looked like a disaster after the hurricane. And one of the reasons for that is that when there is a storm coming and predicted to hit the island, all of the locals tend to bring their vessels into these harbors, and Salinas is probably the most renowned for this. They bring their boats into the harbors to the point where it's wall-to-wall boats. They throw down whatever they happen to have for an anchor and leave their boat there and hope that it will still be there when the storm is over. As a result, there tends to be a mass dragging episode that occurs in this harbor, and that's what tends to really cause the problem, as in most the situation in most hurricanes is the boats that drag that cause most of the problem, and here there tend to be sometimes hundreds of them. So this is a decent place for excellent protection of anything short of a direct hit by a hurricane. Some cruisers leave their boats here for fairly long periods of time, at times, most of the time in the winter time, but can do it even in the summertime. The holding here is excellent. It's very safe. There's generally a lot of cruisers around, very little in the way of crime here. There's always people watching the boats. There's always somebody there to watch your boat. And only about 3 miles away, there is an excellent hurricane hole at the area called Hobos, which is about 3 miles to the east of Salinas. You have within walking distance here, you have a good chandlery and a good hardware. And when I'm talking walking distance, I'm talking a matter of a few blocks. The chandlery, I think, is only about 2 blocks away. The hardware is probably about 4 blocks away. To get downtown, where you can pick up groceries and all of that, and car rental, it's about 1.5 miles probably into town from Salinas, and it's a pleasant little walk. It's flat. There's no hills. Very easy. Annie and I used to make that walk on a regular basis. So here you can see the up close and personal with Salinas Harbor, and the Cayos Ratones are these 2 islands that are out here that sit offshore. And then when you come in and stay in the deeper water. This is feet, so you can see it goes 8 feet to 11 feet, 7 feet, and then when you get into the harbor, you got 10 feet. All the way almost to shore. So this whole harbor is useful anchoring. This island Cayomata off here to the west is a pretty good sized mangrove island. Lots of height to it, so you get good protection from any, if there were any winds coming from the west, without shutting off the harbor completely, so that there's good air circulation in this harbor. There's manatees in this harbor. There's one manatee that has a reputation for being quite friendly. And there's an area out here if you want to come out and scrub the bottom of your boat, because this harbor is a little close and the water is not the kind of water that people like to be in. You can come out here and anchor between these 2 mangrove islands in 15, 20 feet of water. Drop the hook, clean the bottom of your boat. We used to come out here with the dinghy a lot of times and just snorkel all around these islands out here. Very interesting little area to spend time. And there's good deep water coming through here, or if you want to come through in more shallow water, there's nothing much to fear here if you're out in between the 2 bits of land that are here. So this is a very easy place to spend some time, very easy place to navigate. And there's a photograph of Salinas Harbor looking to the north. You can see that all the boats are facing to the east into the trade winds, and the height of the mountains off behind the harbor to the north. Cayomata over here behind the boats is that mangrove island that I was pointing out. Very easy water to spend time in. It's a good, nice dinghy ride. It's not a wet dinghy ride generally going in and out. Very easy. This is looking out from the harbor to the mouth where you came in, right out here. And that land that's off there across the top of the mouth here is one of the Cayos Ratones that you saw. And just a very easy place to hang out. So if you're in Salinas, you have access to just about any place on the island by rental car. Very easy. The Autopista, which is the main expressway that connects the island, holds the island together basically, runs from San Juan all the way to Mayagüez along the south coast, and then it runs from San Juan partway to the west coast along the north. The Autopista runs right by Salinas and right almost through Salinas. You have easy access to San Juan. You have easy access to Ponce and points west. You can call the rental people. There's a Hertz car rental right in downtown Salinas, so you can call them on the phone and they will bring a car right to the marina for you. They'll pick you up. Then you drop them off at their office and take the car for the day. When you're done for the day, you come back to their office and pick them up, and they will bring you back to the marina and drop you and all of your purchases off at the marina and take the car away. Very easy, all done for about for a small car about $35 for the day. Ponce is only a half hour or so once you're on the autopista, where you have Sam's and Walmart and Sears all at your disposal. Lots of stuff. San Juan's 45 minutes away, where you have some malls. You have a West Marine in San Juan. Caguas is about 35 minutes away, just before you get to San Juan. And they have a Sam's Club and a Costco and a Pep Boys and all that there. I mean, this is a reprovisioning paradise. So as a result, Salinas tends to serve as a home base for a lot of people, for the Northern Caribbean. And there were cruisers that we ran into who would be spending time down on the South American coast, who would, when it came provisioning time, take a 2-day sail up island from the coast down there all the way to Salinas and anchor their boat in Salinas, do their provisioning, spend a couple days in Salinas, and then they would turn around and head back south again. All right, so it's an excellent place. You just got to remember that this is a south-facing coastline. If you're on the north coast of an island this size, you have pretty good protection from the mountains on the island, as is the case in Luperón in the Dominican Republic, where the island can take a direct hit from a hurricane, but because the hurricane's coming from the south and the Luperón is on the north side of the island, you get virtually no effect from the hurricane except some rain. Here, when you're on the south coast of an island, you are subject to a direct hit, and you need to keep that in mind. And do remember that there's absolutely fantastic snorkeling on the seaward side of all those barrier islands, like the Cayos Ratones and some of the other islands that run along there east of Salinas. This is the sign on the shoreline as you pull your dinghy up at Marina de Salinas, which is a very, very cruiser-friendly marina that happens to be there on the western side of the bay in Salinas. They offer water and fuel and dockage and lots of goodies. The autopista. This is a photograph of the autopista, which is the expressway. It's the interstate essentially, except there's no state for it to go inter between. This is the eastbound lane over here, and this is the westbound lane that's over on that side. And very, very easy getting around this country. Publicos. Now, publicos are a form of transportation that lies between a taxi cab and a bus, I guess you would call it. In the Dominican Republic, the publicos are known as guaguas, and they are excellent means of transportation. They're very cheap. They're very easy. They'll pile 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 people into a vehicle, and I mean that literally, in the Dominican Republic. And you will get from point A to point B, and any points in between. They drop people off all the way along and pick people up all the way along on their route, and you'll get from point A to point B for a matter of a few pesos. Okay, maybe $2 or $3 at the most usually, and it was a wonderful system. If you wanted, on the other hand, in the Dominican Republic, if you wanted a taxi cab, it was a whole different ball game. It was yours privately, and you paid a pretty good price for it. You might pay $30, $40, $50 for a cab to go that distance. In the Dominican Republic, the Publico system is supposed to be similar, but the problem with it there was that they can be a Publico and charge you and the other passengers that are with you a very reasonable fare, until all of a sudden they've dumped off those other passengers, and now it's just a gringo and the driver, and suddenly the driver decides that he's not a Publico anymore, and he's going to charge you taxi prices. And we ran into that with one Publico when we were on our way to Ponce one day, and they got us to a certain point where they were in one of their parking ramps which is one of their terminals that they use for changing from one Publico to the next. And suddenly the Publico drivers all became unavailable, and suddenly the price went up, and they had us between the rock and the hard spot, so they thought, and figured we were going to pay them, instead of the $2 that we were planning on, we were going to pay them the 25 or 30 that they wanted. So Annie and I hitchhiked our way back to Salinas, and wrote that one down as one for the books, and you know, we didn't let that happen again. But as far as I'm concerned, the Publicos are not a reasonable way to go. If you're going to take a cab so you know what you're paying up front. You know, when we got to Santa Isabella and saw the problems, we turned around and went back. And we didn't have any problem hitchhiking, but you know, most people probably don't want to do that. So my attitude is rent a car or take a taxi. Usually the car rental is the most reasonable way to go in Puerto Rico. Very easy. The driving is safe. The drivers are not that bad till you get into the nut house of San Juan, which is like any big city. So, but here's some pictures from San Juan. Speak of the devil. Up at the top is a picture of Condom World, which is a chain of adult bookstores that are in Puerto Rico. I found it kind of fascinating that they had these signs. You know, there was one of these in any decent sized town had one of these stores, and they were always quite nice looking. I never went in one, but I found it fascinating just by virtue of the name. It just kind of floored me when I first saw it. You have the cruise ship docks down below in Old San Juan, visible, and a street scene from Old San Juan on the right. And this is a picture of the Autopista in Puerto Rico. And you can see that this purple line that runs along here, and then it turns and runs to the north and goes up past Calle, and then Caguas. This is where the Sam's Club and Caguas is where the Sam's Club and the Costco and the Pueblo grocery store and the Pep Boys are all share one parking lot. From Caguas, you can go on to San Juan. There's also a Sam's Club up here in Carolina, another Sam's Club over here in Bayamon. There's a Sam's Club over here in Humacao. So there's lots of places in Puerto Rico where you can fit out. The rainforest is up here at El Yunque Peak right here, which is just not far from San Juan, not far from Fajardo. The fast ferry to Culebra is over here at Fajardo, where you can come in from Culebra, land here, and then take the highway into Carolina and go to Sam's Club, take it into San Juan and go to the mall or West Marine. You can take or you can drive down here to Humacao and go to a Sam's Club. So there's Ponce down here, Salinas down here. So you can see that this is a pretty easy island to get around. And when you are in Salinas, this is Salinas Harbor again right here, and you want to go to the Virgin Islands, you come out around this point, and we're going to do again what we call staging out, which is drop the hook here after sitting here for a week or two, clean your anchor off, clean your anchor road, and then head out here and go the 4 or 5 miles over here to the Cayos Caribes you see along here, where you will anchor either along behind here or Cayos de Barca along in here. We used to drop the hook right here at the mouth of what's called Boca del Infierno, which is this gap through the reef right here. And Boca del Infierno means literally the mouth of hell. You don't want to take it quite so literally. Most of the time it's not that, but under a nasty heavy trade wind blow, yeah, it can be exactly that. But most of the time what you do is give yourself a chance for the weather to settle down, and you know, wait for a good weather window, give a day for the seas to calm down, and then head out here and drop the hook right about in here where you're going to sit overnight. We'd come out in the afternoon, clean the bottom of the boat, and then have dinner and spend the night. And then at about 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, we would get up and navigate our way through the Boca, which required that you just look at your, at night, it doesn't do any good to post somebody on the bow. So what you do is you pay close attention to your GPS and go right down the middle and you want to come out at an angle. Don't come out and just turn east, because you got to come out here for a few hundred yards before you decide to turn to the east and then go. There's reef all around in here if you cut too big, if you cut too tight a corner. So give yourself plenty of berth, come all the way out, and then turn to the east, and you'll be underway still in the dark, with an excellent chance to get to Culebra by late afternoon. Now, Hobos is a hurricane hole. All right, Hobos is the area that, let's go back here. When you're in Salinas and you come out here, you come around here and you go into this area down in here, the Punta Colchones, this area right in here are all mangrove islands that are tight, and I mean tight together back in there. You can go all over back in here with a lot of times at least 4 feet and sometimes 7 or 8 feet of clearance down through these areas and carry a pretty decent draft and get some excellent protection. During one hurricane scare, I came back in here with the boat and tucked in a spot where I could almost reach out on both sides and touch the mangroves, and yet had excellent coverage. So the hurricane hole at Hobos, which is that area right there, nobody goes there. The locals do not go there. The locals will not go in there because that whole area is considered to be contaminated. The water is contaminated. It's an old industrial basin, so you don't want to eat any fish out of there. You don't want to drink the water out of there. But as far as going in there and hiding from a hurricane, I have no problem at all with that. Again, lots of nooks and crannies. Even with our 6-foot draft, we could get in there. Not to mention the fact that you have out along south of this, okay, you're sitting in here, you've got this entire area out here of barrier islands that give you an additional layer of protection before anything gets to you. So when I told you about what happened in Salinas Harbor during Hurricane Georges, the few boats that spent the hurricane in the hurricane hole at Hobos, when the whole thing was over, were questioning what hurricane. They didn't even know that anything happened. So it's the protection is that good, evidently. And here is a close-up view of the hurricane holes. Here you can see you've got all of these areas that you can cruise around in and tuck in. Just tremendous protection all over up in here. And yet you have all of these areas out here, which are pretty decent sized mangrove islands that are probably less than a mile offshore, to give you protection from the outer side. So keep that in mind. And this is as far as I'm concerned, other than that really tight hurricane hole I mentioned earlier that's over in Boca Raton, where you probably never get in. This is one where you might have it all to yourself, and the protection is as good as you're going to find on a south-facing shoreline in the Caribbean, I think. This shot was taken from the top of my mast, and that is we are tucked back in the hurricane hole, and I'm looking out. And the only deficiency that I could find for this particular hurricane hole was that these mangroves are a little bit stunted. They are not all that tall. They on average are probably 20 feet tall, maybe. And when you're tucked into a mangrove area for a hurricane hole, you ideally would like to have not only 30-foot trees around you, you would like to have a mountain in front of you also, but no such luck here. But it's still pretty darn good protection in the event of a storm. And here is pictures looking north into from out when we were anchored out at one of the barrier islands. This picture down here is looking to the north, where you can see the mountains back here, and the hurricane hole is in all of this brushy looking mangrove area through here. We're probably close to probably 3/4 of a mile away from shore, something like that, maybe a half mile. And then over along the Cayos Caribes, which is just to the east of the Boca del Inferno that I showed you, are these Cayos Caribes, which are a group of little islands that face off to the east. And you can't go through here because this is all reef between these. You can see the breaking water along the reef out there. You get pretty good protection in here as far as for sitting in the trade winds and wanting to enjoy the breeze, the trade wind breeze, without getting any of the surf. This reef out here breaks the surf beautifully and keeps you just in the flattest water you might want to be in when you're in here, and you can sit here and just enjoy. And it was one of our favorite places to go and hang out. So now for jumping off to the Virgin Islands, as I mentioned, you head out to those outer barrier islands and sit there beside the Boca del Inferno. You know, check out the opening in daylight and get a feel for it. Annie and I used to make a habit of snorkeling all these kinds of places. It started up on the Great Lakes, frankly, but you know, when we got into the Bahamas, whenever we were in doubt or had any questions about an opening that we had to go through, we'd take our dinghy there and jump out of the dinghy and snorkel the area and take a look at what's under the surface. If we didn't feel comfortable snorkeling it, then we would take our handheld depth sounder and we would sound the area. But we did that at the Boca del Inferno to the point where we were extremely relaxed about going through the Boca, because we knew the topography under the surface of the water quite well and knew exactly how much room we had to play with. Don't be afraid to do that sort of thing. The snorkeling is great. It's wonderful. So we were able to make an easy transit in the dark using our GPS and our depth sounder. And we headed out in a southeasterly direction, and get a good 500 yards or so before you past the Boca before you head east, and then turn and go east, and you got a good ride the whole way. You need a good 2-day weather window to make this trip. Good 2 days weather window will get you there, and with room to spare. You want to have light breezes from north of east, so that you can get a nice flat motor sail. All right, you don't want to be beating your brains out trying to motor or sail into the wind. Pull up the anchor somewhere between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, and you can get to Culebra or Vieques in early to mid-afternoon, depending on where you're going. It's 20 miles to the southeast point of Puerto Rico, which is Punta Tuna, and it is 15 miles further from there to Vieques, where you can anchor either at Green Beach, which is on the very western shoreline of Vieques, or our preference was Isabel Segunda, which is about halfway along the north shore of Vieques. And it's 40 miles from Punta Tuna to Culebra. So when we could, we would make the jump all the way from the 60-mile jump all the way from Boca del Inferno to Culebra. And that would get us there by mid to late afternoon, which was a great trip, a very enjoyable trip. And here again, you can see the spots where you can drop the hook here and wait overnight, right up in here, or you could go over here. Some people would drop their hook over here, but sit here and wait till 2-3 o'clock in the morning and head out, motor through the Boca when it's flat calm. No problem whatsoever. You don't even need any light to do this, and just a very pleasant trip. And this is the trip from Salinas to Vieques Sound. You can, right here is Punta Tuna, right there. So Salinas is right back here, right there. So you come out here through the Boca del Inferno, follow along the shoreline about a mile or two out, and come across here. You're 20 miles from there, and then from here you head out into Vieques Sound, and that is a pretty easy run. Here's the chart that goes here. Again, you're from Salinas, you're right down in here, coming out the Boca, around here to Punta Tuna, which is right down about here, and then head up through here. And if you're going to Culebra, you're headed up here. If you're going to Vieques and Green Beach, you're just going right over to here where you can drop the hook for the night and get pretty good protection from the easterlies. And then, or you can do what we did and come around to the north shore of Vieques on one occasion, and we anchored off Isabel Segunda, which is right about in the middle of the north coast. I lost my pointer. Anyway, right about in the middle of the north coast of Vieques. which is Isabel Segunda's right in here. And then from there we jumped across to Culebra. So you can see the relationship of the Spanish Virgin Islands, all of this up in here, and these two large islands are the Spanish Virgin Islands. They belong to Puerto Rico, essentially. And you can see that they are just a continuation of the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. Here's Tortola up in here. Here's St. John. Here is St. Thomas. Down here is St. Croix. You can see that it's all the same island chain. And when you are in the Virgins, you are in the Virgins. So you got from either of these places, you got a quick hop over to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Again, another view. And one thing that I do like people to be aware of is there's a point of that sticks out right here, a reef area, the Escollo, that is a relatively uncomfortable area, I always felt, to cross. It is an area that sticks out into the water from this very western end, and it comes almost due north off the island of Vieques. And it is an area where there's a collection of a lot of flotsam and jetsam that tends to be potentially an issue as far as unpredictable depths and so forth. So my attitude is to give that Escollo a reasonable berth. I unfortunately can't tell you much about Vieques because other than a brief stop at Isabel Segunda, Annie and I did not adopt Vieques like the way we adopted Culebra. We just had we stuck around another year or two, we probably would have done a little more exploring in Vieques. But the north shore of Vieques does not offer much in the way of cruising. It's the south shore, just like all of these islands so far, the Antilles that we've run into, the south coast of Hispaniola, the south coast of Puerto Rico, the south coast of Vieques, the south coast of Culebra offer the best protection. The Atlantic side of these islands is always not as hospitable. Even though the north shore of Vieques is on Vieques Sound and not the Atlantic directly, it still doesn't have the nooks and crannies that the south sides of these islands tend to have. So we never went ashore. Okay, you got to keep in mind that Vieques for many years was a live ammunition facility for the U.S. military, and therefore there's always the possibility of live military ordnance. So you want to use a little care if you see anything strange around the area. We never went ashore on Vieques, so I can't give much vouch for the island from that respect, but a lot of people felt about Vieques the same way Annie and I felt about Culebra, that it was a little jewel of an island and someplace special. We heard favorable reports. There's a lot of good things that we heard about the bioluminescent bays along the south shoreline of Vieques, Puerto Fierro and Puerto Mosquito. You can dinghy from Sun Bay or Esperanza. I mean, there's some good places to visit. You got to be careful because there's a lot of reefs on the south shoreline of Vieques, and some local knowledge will help. But if you go slow, it's like any other place. You can get in and out of these places pretty easily, and sometimes you can do it pretty easily even with a big boat, let alone with a dinghy. If you cross the Escollo, as I mentioned earlier, Escollo Arenas at the west end of Vieques, don't get too close to the island. The depths are a little less predictable along there. If you're going to cross it, do it out at the far north margin of that point of shoaling. And my opinion is that this Escollo is a result of two currents meeting together, usually probably tidal currents. And I think there's a tendency for those two currents to meet at that particular point and drop whatever it happens to be they happen to be carrying at the time into that particular location. I think that's probably how it formed. There was a time or two that we crossed that area when you could see a very strange pattern of wave movement on the Escollo, and I think that was probably during a tidal run. You can scuba dive if you're into scuba diving. There's supposed to be some very good scuba diving about 2 miles southwest of Vieques from Esperanza out on Angel Reef. So another thing to consider. And here again is the island of Vieques. And as you can see, the northern shore, pretty flat. There's really not much here. Isabel Segunda has about the only little spot where you get a little protection. And it was decent. We anchored there and didn't have any issues at all. We were probably a quarter of a mile or so offshore, and the holding was decent, and there was not much wind that we could feel. You get a little something over here in these reefy areas at the eastern end, but where all the action really is as far as places to visit in Vieques is along the southern shore, where you've got all of these nooks and crannies. You can do some real gunk holing along in these areas, and it's very attractive, and Annie and I always intended to do it. We just never got around to that particular spot. So if you want to go to El Yunque in the mountains, all right, we're back. Just one more thing we want to talk about here as far as on the mainland in Puerto Rico. And El Yunque National Forest is up in the mountains just to the southeast of San Juan. And El Yunque is the name of the forest. And it's located in what they call the Eastern Sierra de Loquillo Range near the east coast. The tropical rainforest is at the higher elevations where it rains about 6 meters of rain a year. Okay, 6 meters a year, that's like 300 inches of rain. There's no dry season, so it's lush. This is not your Caribbean dry desert island type of situation. This is a tropical rainforest. Now, you go up into these tropical rainforests. I've been to this one. I've been to the one on Tortola that's up at the top of the mountain on Tortola. These tropical rainforests are just wet, lush green areas. There's really, it's not like you're in the jungles of Yucatan or the jungles of Africa. It is a tropical rainforest. There's a little bit difference. The plants, species, the environment is just not like the rest of the island. And, a tropical rainforest environment is a special type of ecology. It looked like a normal forest to us, so it really didn't mean much to us. But El Toro is the highest mountain in the park, and El Yunque is the name of the second highest peak in the park, but the park is referred to as El Yunque. Highest elevation in Puerto Rico is just to the north of Ponce at Cerro de Punta in the central mountain range of Puerto Rico. So, you got almost an extra 1,000 feet on the highest mountain in that park. So, and there's a picture of the coqui up in the corner there. The coqui is the national, kind of like the national emblem of Puerto Rico. It is a frog, and the name coqui is supposed to mimic the sound that it makes. It has kind of a whistling noise where it goes coqui, and these things make all kinds of noise in the woods at night. Now, Culebra was our favorite spot. We found Culebra to be our favorite spot of all of our cruising that we did. It was the one spot we had a hard time pulling ourselves away. We would hang out in Daquiti Bay on the south shore, which is just at the western entrance to the main bay, Bahia Honda, on Culebra. And Daquiti Bay was just a great spot because it was surrounded by a little bit of a barrier reef, but there were no islands. There was nothing in your way. You could almost, when the water was calm, you could almost not see the reef was there. And yet it gave you excellent protection when the wind kicked up, and you'd be tied to a mooring ball or sitting at anchor in Daquiti Bay and have just excellent protection from the wave action, and yet still feel the full brunt of the trade winds blowing on you. It was a reasonably sheltered dinghy ride from downtown Dewey, so you could get into town, or we would dinghy into Ensenada Fuedoso, which is just around the point from Daquiti Bay, and then we could walk to town, which was about probably close to a mile walk. Daquiti has excellent protection, free moorings. Snorkeling is fun. There's some large starfish beds there, the big starfish, what they call the cushion star, on the bottom in Daquiti Bay. Excellent place to work on your boat. You clean the bottom of your boat. Excellent vantage point for watching the regatta. Excellent vantage point for watching people who are coming from all points around, who are headed to Culebra to come in on their boat. You can watch the boats come in for hours. Downtown Dewey is a pleasant little town on the island of Culebra. There is Bahia Flamenco around on the northwest shore, which is a popular beach. There's a campground out there. The Puerto Ricans come out there for camping. Very pleasant area out there. Um, there is, if you want to take your boat and drop the hook in Bahia Honda, which is, down in Ensenada Honda, which is down just off the main the main street in downtown Dewey. Uh, it's a very pleasant, close dinghy ride into town. Nice place. There's some restaurants there. Uh, we used to. That was one of the places, a few places that we could actually get wireless internet signal from the deck of our boat while we were sitting at anchor. One of the few places that we were ever anchored where we could do that. There were lots of areas to anchor in the vicinity of Culebra. Okay, Bahia Almodovar and Puerto del Manglar, off the adjacent islands. Out in Manglar, there's a starfish population of the long beaded star, the long-armed starfish. We ran into those out there. There's free moorings in all of these anchorages around Culebra. Very nice, but you need to always dive your moorings because they very often are damaged or not solid. In particular, the reason for that is that the Puerto Rican, mentioned earlier, the Puerto Rican Navy, these large, usually 40 plus feet, sometimes 50 feet, cabin cruisers that the Puerto Ricans come out and will tie up, and they will tie up stern to these moorings. So you're talking about a 40-foot boat with a very, very large flat stern-facing cabin, and they would open up the doors on that stern-facing cabin so that the trade winds would blow straight into the boat and ventilate the boat. Fantastic situation, but it wreaked havoc on the moorings. And not only would one boat do this, but then they would invite a friend to raft off on each side, so you might have three 40-foot boats tied stern to one mooring. And when you dive these moorings, you would find that the sand screw is 3-4 turns out of the sand. The mooring pennants were frayed and in bad shape. They don't get inspected and maintained like they should. So my attitude is always dive yours. We had one friend on his sailboat who broke loose one night and happened to go on deck and noticed he was approaching the rocks, and that he still had the mooring ball pennant tied to his bow, but he was no longer attached to the mooring. He was very lucky he didn't lose his boat. I got in the habit of dropping my anchor and about 30 feet of chain on top of the anchor whenever I'd tie up to one of these mooring balls, and I'd leave my anchor sitting there on the ground, on the bottom next to the mooring ball, so that if anything did happen, hopefully my anchor would catch. So something to keep in mind. You can visit nearby Luis Peña and Culebrita and Cayo Norte, which are the three big islands that surround the island of Culebra. They are all sizable, great snorkeling at all of them. I did some spearfishing off Culebrita. You cannot spearfish off Luis Peña because the fish are protected there. But excellent snorkeling at all of these locations, excellent anchoring, good holding. There are mooring balls out at Culebrita in the bay on Culebrita where you can go and hang out. A very popular spot to go visit. So what's so great about Culebra? Well, one of the things that makes it so attractive to me is that you are anchored in an island environment which probably is very similar to what St. Thomas or St. John were like 30 or 40 years ago. It has the feeling of still being pristine and remote and not overpopulated. Just a wonderful area to spend time anchored out or tied to a mooring ball, and yet you can take your dinghy into town and pay the $4.50 round trip fare for the fast ferry that goes from Dewey over to Fajardo on the mainland of Puerto Rico. At that point, you can walk a block, rent a car for $35, and spend the day back in America Okay, you can go to Sam's Club, Costco, Pep Boys. You can go to the movies. You can do just about anything that you might want to do in the United States, any fast food chain you want to visit, whatever your heart's desire. And come back late in the afternoon, drop off the car, board the ferry, and be back on your boat for sundowners in the evening, looking out, sitting in a Caribbean paradise. It's absolutely the only place in the world, I think, that you can probably live this kind of lifestyle. It's about 17 miles, and the ferry ride itself is worth, worth the fare. Over, if you think about over in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgins, it costs about $70 or so to take the ferry from St. Thomas over to Tortola. Probably a shorter trip. This trip is in Puerto Rico from Culebra to the mainland is obviously subsidized by taxpayers, and it's a 17-mile trip each way, 40 minutes, and there's whales to be seen. It's just a wonderful trip, and if the weather is squally, you can sit inside and avoid it entirely. But when the weather is beautiful, it is a fantastic trip in and of itself. It's worth it as an excursion, let alone as a functional trip to get supplies. So rent a car in Fajardo, go and visit all those places. San Juan, Caguas, Humacao, El Yunque. You can catch everything. If you want to fly, you got easy flights in and out of San Juan, and then catch the afternoon ferry back and enjoy sundowners in the cockpit. So a lot of people will leave their boat anchored in Ensenada, Honda, and in the wintertime, and fly home for a week or two before they come back. In the summertime, you got to be hurricane conscious, because there are some hurricane holes in Culebra. They're not the best, but there is some protection there in the event a storm comes in. But the problem is those hurricane holes tend to be kind of taken over by the charter boat trade out of the BVI. So you got to be careful where you go. You're better off probably in the event of a hurricane running over to the mainland and going to Hobos for protection, where you will be the only boat there. So, where else in the United States can you be in the United States for a few hours and then be back in a tropical paradise? Plus, you have from here you have excellent access to the U.S. and British Virgins. So here's a picture of Culebra. You have looking at this chart, you have up to the northeast, you have Cayo Norte. Off directly to the east of Culebra, the little island, is Culebrita. And then off to the west of Culebra here, you have Luis Peña. And then you've got all these reefy areas around here. You've got this bay. This is by Manglar over here. You've got excellent areas to visit here. And just over here, and about 15 miles away off Culebrita, 15-20 miles away, is St. Thomas. So La Cordillera is the rest of the Spanish Virgin Islands, and that's the chain of islands that extends from the northeast corner of Puerto Rico all the way out to Culebra, and it runs along the edge of the Puerto Rican Trench, as we saw on that map that I showed earlier. And these are just the tops of little tiny mountains. There's lots of areas along there where there are anchorages, and in the summertime these areas are eminently explorable. There's not very many spots for overnights, but there are a few, and they are great day anchorages with excellent diving. Supposed to be some great opportunities for scuba along these islets when the weather is settled. So here is the La Cordillera right along here, which is essentially means in Spanish a mountain range. All along here and out here, these are all areas that are explorable and diveable. These areas in here are quite popular little anchorages around these little islands in here, and but these areas along here are right on essentially on the North Atlantic. So in the wintertime, they're not all that good, but in the summertime in settled weather, there's a lot of exploration that you can do there. So what about Puerto Rico? Well, you got great provisioning throughout the island. Doesn't matter where you're at. Lots of places that you can go by car or boat. You've got San Juan, which has all of these places. Plaza Las Americas is the huge shopping mall that's in downtown San Juan. There's a West Marine. You have Old Town San Juan. If you're cruising with pets, you've got excellent veterinary care throughout the entire island of Puerto Rico. There are some major league emergency clinics in San Juan if you have a pet with an emergency problem. There are good hurricane holes. Boquerón has one. La Peguera is not bad. Salinas is excellent. Hobos is probably, without a doubt, the best on the island, with possibly that small area in Boquerón. And then there's even hurricane holes in Culebra. It's an excellent jumping off point for going to the Virgin Islands or even for the Southern Caribbean. And in spite of our time there, we really were limited in the amount of exploration we did because we were too busy enjoying what we were doing. And I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, drop me a line through one of the reply boxes or through my email on this website, islandhoppingtothecaribbean.com. And if you have any issues or questions, let me know. Thank you very much.